I want to introduce our speaker today, Allison Songkran. Allison has worked in the field of speech pathology and in the schools for over 20 years and in Georgia school districts. And I always have to say this, I knew Allison when she first started in the field and was working with preschoolers. And even then she had developed a knack in working with or special expertise in working with students with autism and significant disabilities. And through the years, she's now worked with all different age levels, preschool through high school and even adults. And she truly has some great ideas to share with us. She's currently working for Cherokee County Schools as a facilitator, but she's still got that SLP in her. So welcome, Allison. Glad to have you tonight.
Thanks, Debbie. This is one of my favorite topics, working with low-functioning and minimally verbal students, and I have really lately developed a love for middle school and high school students. About 5 years ago, I remember getting a phone call from my supervisor saying, I need you to leave preschool for 1 year. And I really panicked because I'd been in preschool so long, but within like 6 months, I decided that you can't take me out of middle school and high school. It's just, I love it. First of all, they sit, so that was wonderful. But it's just such a unique group of students to work with. So we're going to talk tonight about how we can structure therapy to better meet their needs. All right, these are just a couple of housekeeping things, a disclosure statement for you guys. And then some of our learning outcomes. The first thing is that I really want you to understand methods to determine motivators for individuals with limited verbal skills. And this really is one of the most important things to establish when working with children with autism, is to figure out what it is that rocks their world, what it is that motivates them. And then being able to describe ways to make therapy activities meaningful and predictable for middle school and high school students with significant disabilities. If you can really structure your activities to be meaningful and predictable, you're automatically going to have less behavior issues. And the third thing is working on providing ways to use visual supports to increase social engagement and functional communication skills. Visual supports are the most evidence-based strategy for autism. Of course, it can be paired with other strategies as well, such as ABA, social stories, all those good techniques that we know to use with our students with autism. I know I've often said in IEPs when something comes up about a student needing support on a particular objective or a particular skill, I'll often say, do we have a visual for that? Because it always goes back to, do we have the right supports in place, which 9 times out of 10 means, do we have a visual support in place for that student? So talking about what rocks your world, we're going to look at what motivates you. We all have something that we're willing to work for. I know in the world of autism and behavioral support therapists and BCBAs, one thing that I often hear them say is, what is that student's currency? What are they willing to work for? And that's really like the first line of defense when we start looking at behaviors for a student. But it's also my first line of defense when I'm trying to figure out what is it worth for a student to communicate. Then we look at special interests. We know that restricted interests are often lead to that first diagnosis of autism. Of course, we want to consult with the parents to figure out what motivates that student. And then observe types of activities or objects that the student gravitates toward. About 2 years ago, I began working at a self-contained school. It was a psychoeducational school, and all the students there have some type of behavior that is preventing them from making it in a typical school. And I remember going into one of the classrooms, and one of the students that a lot of the faculty was really struggling with was a child who I, of course, learned to love and adore. And I asked the teacher, okay, tell me what motivates him. What's something that he really, really likes that you think he would be willing to work for? And the teacher said to me, he loves food. But you can't use that because that really hypes him up. I was like, okay, thanks a lot, y'all. So you gave me this thing that really motivates him, but I'm not able to use it. So what I really did was just spend a lot of time observing this student in his natural environment. And one thing that I observed over and over that he did was he would spit into his hands, and then he would rub his hands together, or either he would rub that spit onto himself, like his arms or his legs. So I really watched that a lot, and I was able to develop that negative behavior into a reason to communicate. And what we discovered with him is that he has extremely dry skin. You can just look at his legs and at his arms and see how dry and scaly his skin is. So what we developed was a need to communicate the need for lotion. And he absolutely loves this activity now. Now, when he sees a lotion bottle come out, he runs across the room and automatically sits down at the therapy table, ready to work. So I was really just able to observe that student in his natural environment and see what it was that he was gravitating toward and what particular behavior he did repetitively, and turn that into a positive thing. Another way to figure out motivators is to perform a reinforcer inventory or checklist. And those can be both formal and informal. And I'm going to go through a couple of those just so that you can kind of see what those look like. The PECS manual, I think it's PECS edition 4, has something at the end of it called a vocabulary selection worksheet. And that's designed basically just to go home with the parents to let you know what are some of their highly reinforcing items. And it's great for a student who is on the beginning level of PECS because it tells us what our target vocabulary needs to be. So that's a wonderful, quick way to get some assessment back from the parent. Then there is the ABLES, which if you work in the world of autism, you know that that is really a standardized measure that they use within the autism community. And it's assessment of basic learning and language skills. And there is a reinforcer checklist that's a part of that whole assessment program. If you're fortunate enough to have a BCBA in the community that you work in or within the school district, they can often guide you to that reinforcer checklist. Then a really simple way to figure out reinforcers is to do what's called a quick preferred assessment of reinforcers. And basically what that is you put two objects in front of a student, and this is great for our nonverbal population. And whatever he reaches for, you know that that is the preferred one. Then you're going to take that preferred item, pair it with something else, and see what he reaches for, and just kind of continue through that process. Also, if you look online and if you just Google reinforcer motivator checklist, there's going to be a ton that come up. This is an example of a reinforcer checklist. This is one that I made for a district that I used to work for. And basically it just goes home, but it really narrows down the different categories that we want to look at. We want to look at edibles. And we know with autism, a lot of times things are very restricted and they're very specific. So we want, like, what specific type of water do they like? Does it have to be out of a bottle? Does it have to be tap water? Does it always have to be Propel water? Those are things that we need to know. We look at other categories, too, to gather information about reinforcers, such as sensory. We look at things like, do they like to jump on a trampoline? Do they like to swing? Do they like a therapy ball? And then, of course, we're going to look at what their special interests are. Are they interested in trains? Is it only Thomas the Train, or is it always the Caboose? And we're going to use all this data that we get from the parent to help us tailor our therapy. This is something that I did when I worked in middle school, and it helped me to understand the student better, and it helped me to learn more about what the student's interests were. I just called it a weekend sheet, and a lot of our ID classes or our self-contained classes have what's called a morning meeting, and I use this as a part of my morning meeting. I would send it home every weekend. I just laminated it, and I would have the parents circle for me, or even the student, where they went to over the weekend, and something that they played with. This particular example that I pulled up was from when I worked in preschool. So when the student comes back on Monday morning, a part of our morning meeting would be me saying, where did you go this weekend? So they already have that carrier phrase, I went to. They've got the visual support to help them express themselves better. And then I would say, tell me something that you played with. And they could answer back by looking at this to visually prompt them, I played with bubbles or I played with music. But that also gives me a lot of insight into what are those things that that student likes to do during their free time. Can I take some of those activities and tailor those into therapy to make therapy more meaningful and predictable for them? And this was great, too, for sending home for homework when I didn't have time to recreate something new every week. This was very meaningful for that population to just send home every weekend. All right, let's look at requesting motivators. When we start out teaching functional communication, we usually start out by teaching that student to request. And we usually start out by teaching them just to say the word, point to it, show us a picture of it, and then we start moving into combining words. And the natural progression in the past has always been, I want plus the object. And I've really had to retrain myself on doing this because it just comes so natural to me for a student to say ball and then for me to try and prompt them to say, I want ball. But instead, we really need to think of using the person's name, a verb, and an object to request. And there's lots of reasons behind that. Number one, individuals with autism have difficulty using people's names and verbs. And in the past, our focus has heavily been based in teaching names for objects. And if you were to follow any class around and just listen to what the therapist, the teacher, and the parapro say, it's a lot of, what's that? What's that? So it's a lot of just naming objects, naming objects. And if you think about it, if you're having the student request, I want object all day long, you really have not taught them any other verbs, and you really have not taught them any people's names. All you have taught them is I want noun, I want noun, I want noun. Nouns, nouns, nouns. So when we put requesting in this format, it really allows for their language to become more creative. And we can also color code our visual supports for student success. One thing we know about students with autism is that they are really good at matching and sorting. So let's take that skill that they're really good at and help them with a skill that they're not so good at, which is communication. And I'm going to show you some examples of this as well. All right, this is from a student who was on my caseload. And when I met this student, he was already pretty successful with PECS, but what he was doing was the sentence phase, where he would request by saying, I want plus object. So he was putting two pictures together, which would just be the I want picture and then the object picture, and requesting. So what I did was kind of revamp his PECS book to reflect more of this requesting with name plus verb plus object. So instead of saying, I want music, now we're teaching him to say, Josh, listen music. And you can see how it's color-coded. In this particular instance, all of our reds were the people, all of our greens were the verbs, and all of our yellows were the objects. This is something that I recommend for everybody on the child's IEP team. It's a simple way that we can all work on requesting, is to take just a big plastic jar. This is one that I have that probably came from Sam's, and it had the like industrial sized pretzels in there. But this is so good for requesting because it can be used for many different reinforcers. You can have OT or other staff place needed items in a jar to increase their communication opportunities. So instead of the student just reaching for if it's like their little fidget or if it's a car that they like to carry around, instead of saying, I want car, the car would be placed inside this clear container where they can see it. And now I would have them be more creative and say something like, Allison, open jar. And then I would open the jar and give them their car. This is a closer look at Josh's PECS manual that I recreated for him, just so that you can better see how everything is color-coded for him. And when you open the pages of his book, you'll see like a red page, a green page, and a yellow page. And one thing that I do that I have really enjoyed over the past couple of years is taking the folders that like you find at the beginning of the school year when all the stores are having their back-to-school specials, and that is those laminate file folders that are a little bit thicker than the paper file folders. I'll just cut those and I punch holes in those and place those inside their PECS book. That way they're already color-coded, but they tend to be really durable, and I found that those outlast me just like laminating a regular file folder or me laminating a file folder with construction paper on top of it. So that's just a little hint that really has worked well for me. And then over on the right-hand side of the screen, you're going to see a key ring. You can't really see the key ring too well, but it is attached to the visual support. It is a spiral keychain. They're often called wrist coils. You can find those at Walmart, Office Depot. But this was a support that I made for his Parapro. He has a one-on-one Parapro that follows him during the day. And what we did was we sat down at the beginning of the year and talked about, okay, what are some things that you feel like he needs to communicate to you during the day? So this way, the Parapro has the supports on him, and he's now prompting Josh to communicate those needs to him. And on the front, you'll see the actual person's name, verb plus object, but behind that, you would see like one strip of just all reds. Then the next strip would be all greens, and then the next strip would be all yellows. And so we just really are trying to get him to be more creative and more spontaneous with his communication. Here, a need that he has is for Andrew to tie his shoe. So that's available, and it's on Andrew so that he can visually prompt Josh as needed during the day. All right, and I have a video of Josh, so hopefully I can pull it up for you guys to see.
Josh, Mr. Andrew, throw the basketball. Who do you want to throw the basketball? Josh, throw basketball. Throw it. Good, Josh. Again. Yeah, good job, Josh. Who else do you want to have a turn now? Who gets a turn now? Who do you want to throw the basketball? Oh, you said Andrew throw basketball. It's my turn. It's my turn.
All right. As you saw in the video, Josh really enjoys playing basketball, and that really turned into just a standard therapy activity where I would go into the gym with him and his Parapro, and it turned out to be a great thing. But I was really able to teach his Parapro the strategies to use with him, and of course we know that's really what we want, we're there to teach strategies a lot of the time.
Allison,
all right, moving. Yes.
Sorry, can you hit share your screen again?
Okay, hold on one second. Are we good?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. This is the sensory room that was at the special school that I worked at. We know that children with autism are often sensory seekers. So really we should be using a sensory room in therapy. So what I tried to do in their sensory room was adapt it for communication. And as you can see, I had everything color-coded. All the people were on red, all the verbs were on green, all the nouns were on yellow so that they could request those things. All right, more sensory. I keep using Josh as an example, but he is a great example of a sensory seeker. His teacher kind of struggled with being able to give me some good motivators for him, but I found that his teacher was rubbing his back a lot. So I brought in a back scratcher, and he would request Allison scratch back. And all the parapros used to kid me that I was going to open up a spa for students with autism because I would always want to give them deep pressure and hold their heads or scratch their back or scratch their head. So you never know, maybe that's on the horizon for me too. Okay, here's the head scratcher that I would often use. And then the student that we talked about earlier who really had the love for lotion, we took that love for lotion and we developed it into a therapy activity. Not only did he learn to request lotion, but he was an older student and he was still working on identifying body parts. Well, it's pretty boring for a 17-year-old to have someone say all day, touch head, touch neck, touch face. But how more exciting it is for him now that an arm, a neck, a face, and hands all have meaning and a purpose. So we were able to take that and turn it into something that was more meaningful for him as a way to teach body parts. Okay, this is makeup and nails, and I had a couple of girls who were around 16, 17, definitely lower functioning, and we were struggling to come up with things that were a little more age appropriate for them, but they definitely love to do makeup and nails. So I brought in just like a Barbie mannequin, and we would shampoo the Barbie's hair, we would do makeup. I would just get like generic makeup from Dollar Tree and bring that in. And she really enjoyed washing the hair in the sink, and I think a lot of it had to do with, if you think about it, where she's at developmentally, it was really a lot like water play for a preschooler, and that's kind of where she was at on a social development level, and this allowed her to kind of participate in water play in a more age-appropriate way and a functional way because we were learning about washing hair. But with an activity like this, I could certainly work on requesting different colors or shades of makeup, work on making comments about the doll's appearance, work on sequencing the steps for either washing hair, braiding hair, and then again I get to work on all those verbs that we know are missed often with children with autism. We could talk about verbs such as combing, brushing, parting, and braiding. And then this was something that came up towards the end of the year with this little group of students, and that was having a nail party. I found that this was a great opportunity for reverse inclusion. We had a lot of students at this school who were more self-contained EBD, but that had pretty good language skills and were highly verbal. And it was a great way for us to get some type of social verbal model for these lower end students. And some of the teachers in the EBD classrooms were actually able to use us as a reward for that EBD child to work for that opportunity to come and interact with us. And for my students, it was a great way for them to practice initiating interactions with their peers by inviting them to the nail party. And I'm going to show you a visual support that we use for that in a few minutes. These are some visual carrier phrases that I use to support the hair and makeup activities. And what I do with these visual carrier phrases, you'll see me use them a lot, is I just run them off on regular copy paper, and then I'll put them and page protectors, and then I'll put all those page protectors in a notebook so that I can just quickly get to them as needed. So I would have my notebook with me when I was working with this student, and of course she would be working on I want, and then she knew that there were two things to fill in, an adjective and a noun, and so hers might be I want blue eyeshadow. And then this is the visual support I referenced before about inviting friends to paint nails. So I would just copy this, laminate it, put it on a clipboard, and have this in front of the student, and take the student to maybe 3 other students and invite them to paint nails. If the student was unable to read, obviously I could put a photograph of Rachel, Abby, and Melissa instead. But what she would do is have the photographs in front of her or the written words, go up to that student and say, would you like to paint nails with me? If they're limited verbally, just having that picture of the nails was enough to help me get that message across to the peer. And then to help them be more independent with the task, we would have them check off as they invited each person to the nail party. And then music. Music is just one of my favorite things to do in therapy. And when you're in preschool, it's just a natural part of therapy. You don't even think twice about doing it. And I was really shocked when I got to middle school and high school to find out that a lot of the SLPs did not use music. And this is just a quote by Bono, that music can change the world because it can change people. And I've just noticed with the population that I work with, as soon as you turn on music, heads turn, and you're going to see the interest levels are peaked, and the joint attention too just really increases. And music really is one of the easiest ways to increase joint attention and student engagement. The Journal of Music Therapy has well documented the benefits of music to students with disabilities. You can almost open any issue of that journal and find something in there related to a student with a disability. The key with middle school is making it age appropriate to the best we can. And this is actual visual support that one of the teachers that I worked with had already created. And this was just a simple choice board. And it was a part of their morning meeting that they had this little bit of free time to choose music. And what he did was just take screenshots of the videos that they could watch on the smart board, and they each got a chance to pick one and then put it in the finished pocket. And this is a visual support that I use for music, and it's again going back to the 3-ring binder. On the left-hand side, you will see choices, and those would be examples of song choices. I like to use baseball card protectors, and those are available. I usually get mine either on Amazon or at Walmart. Very reasonable. You can get like a pack of 25 or 50 for less than $5. They are great. They are so sturdy, and it's such a nice alternative to lamination when you don't have time, or like at some schools you might have like a 1-week waiting period to get something laminated and back. And in our role of special education, you don't always have that time to be able to wait. So I'm just able to slip inside the baseball card protector whatever visual support I've made, whether it be a board maker symbol or an actual photograph, and then I can take it right back out. They are super sturdy. I know another student I worked with last year, part of his behavior issues were he ripped up all of his PECS photographs, and needless to say, his SLP was not too happy about that. So what we ended up having to do with him was transfer his visual supports into baseball card protectors because they're so thick, not rip them up. But anyway, on the left-hand side are going to be the choices for music. And then when you flip the notebook over, the back side would have a visual carrier phrase, I want to sing. At that point, I would have the student choose one of those music choices on the left, then place it on the backhand side of the notebook to say a sentence such as, I want to sing, shout, or whatever it is. And then inside the notebook, I kept a lot of like additional visual supports that I might need to supplement the music. All right, party music is a really good way to teach concepts such as categories and positional words. When I first started in middle school, I really didn't know where to go for music that was age appropriate. And one of the first CDs that I bought was just simple party music songs that like you might hear at a wedding reception, such as Hot, 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 Shout, Locomotion, things like that. And I found that most students have at least heard these songs before. It kind of goes across all different types of taste in music. But what I was able to do is take these basic party music songs and turn them into some type of therapy activity. So, for example, the song Hot, 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 while it was playing, we would sort items based on temperature, hot versus cold. While the song Shout was playing, we would sort items based on loudness. Is this something that is quiet? Is this something that is loud? Life is a Highway by Rascal Flatts. We were able to sort transportation while that was playing, and we would sort it by what goes on the road versus what does not go on the road. And then the song Locomotion, we use that to teach positional words. So we would line up and form a train, and we would talk about who was at the front, who was in the middle, and who was in the back of the train. And this is an example of those visual supports that I was just talking about that correlate to that party music. And I already have these made, and they are available for you on forgaslps.com. You can find those, and I think I have about 3 or 4 songs on there with the visual supports already made. And again, I would laminate these and keep these inside my music notebook. So we would start out by using that music notebook for the child to make choices and to request the song. Once the song is requested, then I would go inside the notebook, pull out some visual supports such as these to teach those specific language skills such as categorization. All right, dance party, another great opportunity for reverse inclusion. I had one student who did not have a lot of friends, so we learned to develop friends by having dance parties. And it was something that I just happened upon with her. One day I noticed that she was up and dancing to some music, and I had really never seen her engaged with a lot. She pretty much preferred to sit all day. So I was so excited that she was up and moving. So what we did was we downloaded the Just Dance videos, and you can access those with YouTube. Just make sure you preview it first for the appropriateness, including all the commercials now that are a part of YouTube videos. But we really use this to increase her social opportunities. We would put this on a smart board. Again, just like we did with the nail party, she would have to invite peers to her dance party, and it got to where we would put it on her schedule for, I think we did it once every other Wednesday. And again, we would go back to that reverse inclusion, invite some of those EBD students to her dance party. Down below is just a set of like a little set of drums, really, I think is what those are. And we had one student who really became engaged with the dance party by playing that instrument for us. These are some ways to increase social and communication opportunities with a dance party. On the left-hand side, you will see a clear pencil box. And what I typically do with those are I'll put my visual supports inside the box, and then I will put a strip of Velcro on both the front and the back. So on this particular support, on the front, I might have Let's Dance. And then if you flip it over to the back, I would have pictures of students that were a part of our dance party. And I would have my identified student go to the back side, find a photograph, flip it over, put that photograph next to Let's Dance, and then she would have to take that pencil box and hand it to that person to indicate, Jane, let's dance. And that was her way to initiate interaction. Over on the left-hand side, you'll see more of what we were talking about before, learning how to request with a person's name, a verb, and a noun. So this was just a visual support that you could use with a dance party where you could have all the students that were involved. They could take turns picking whose turn it was to choose the next song. On the bottom right hand of the screen, you will see a cup, and it's just full of popsicle sticks. And on the popsicle sticks are written students' names. If you have non-readers, of course, you could do a photograph of each student. But it's really a great support to use even for activities that aren't social in nature. I know in one of my classes, I took this popsicle activity and made an academic activity become a social activity. The class that I worked in used News to You, which is basically an adapted literacy program, and the students were really working on like reading skills. But what I did was turn that into a social opportunity, and they would have to pick a popsicle out and go hand it to that person and say, Allison, your turn. And just to be able to have that social initiation and interaction was huge for that particular student. The next thing is adapted magazines, and this is a project that I took upon myself last year, no, the year before, sorry, and I made a library of adapted magazines for our county. And basically, how you do an adapted magazine is you're going to rip off the front cover, put the front cover of the magazine in the front part of a 3-ring binder, and then you're going to adapt the text on certain pages. And what I did is I just picked out random pages of a magazine, and I would put those pages in a page protector, adapt the text, and then make like a board maker or a Google image symbol to go with it. So this particular magazine is Teen Vogue. Over on the left-hand side, you'll see it says Taylor Swift plays a guitar. So that was basically our adapted way to look at that magazine. And it's nice because now they're looking at material that is more age appropriate. But it's also nice because I was able to, again, capture the special interests of those students. If I knew that it was a student that really liked horses, then we could look at a horse magazine together and work on all of our IEP objectives through that magazine activity. If it was a student who had a special interest in cars, there are plenty of cars magazines. I will tell you, this was a very lengthy project that I undertook. I think I bit off more than I could chew. And luckily, I had the support of a parapro who was really into this activity as well, and she really helped me develop this library. So it really is a time-consuming thing, but it will last. It's one of those things that we need to reach out to people in our community to help us with. If your school has parent volunteers, it's something that you could enlist their help with. I know from time to time there might be a parapro who's maybe a one-on-one parapro, and their student goes hospital homebound. There's little instances like that that pop up. This is a great time filler for them, but it's so handy for you to have this resource of materials. These are some visual carrier phrases that I would use for commenting about the pictures in the magazine. So while we're looking at those pictures in, say, a teen magazine, I might say, hey, tell me what you see. And then I would just visually point to she is, and that would be enough in some students to help them get started and initiate the sentence she is, and then they would fill in the blank. Or I might say, hey, tell me what you see. And then I would visually point to I see A. That way, we're not creating a student with echolalia. We're creating someone who can initiate their own thoughts and ideas by giving them that visual support. Vocational task. I don't know what it is about a vacuum cleaner, but so many students with autism love vacuum cleaners. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to make a vacuum cleaner work for me too. And what I have learned is that we can take those special interests, especially in vocational tasks, and make them work for us. If you think about it, many vocational tasks are really repetitive in design, and that makes them appealing to students with autism. The vacuum cleaner goes back and forth. So there's a lot of repetition in that, and it really makes it be a desirable time for therapy. A lot of our older students who are in our self-contained classrooms have vocational training as a part of their daily routine. Why not tack on to that It really is going to simplify your lesson planning if you can do that. And think about how you can target some communication skills during that time. You could certainly work on sequencing tasks, greeting others. If you have a student whose job is emptying trash cans, you can make a little to-do list that they need to greet each person, and they can check it off as they go and empty that teacher's trash can. They can work on requesting help or needed items to perform that vocational task. Another thought with vocational tasks is to video the student performing the task with an iPad and then practice sequencing the event, or use that video to teach social skills by pointing out positive interactions that you see on the video, such as you might give feedback like, hey, I like the way you gave him a high five, or the way you said excuse me before interrupting the teacher. And you'll find that most of our students on the spectrum really enjoy watching themselves on video, so it's a very motivating task in itself. And it's real interesting because I still work privately with, I shouldn't say student, he's really an adult who, again, loves the vacuum cleaner, and he loves to vacuum my house, but he will not vacuum his parents' house, so it really makes his mother very upset. But I have seen in him why he enjoys that task so much, and it really is because it's repetitive in nature. He gets to watch the vacuum cleaner go back and forth. The noise is very repetitive. Even just wrapping up the cord, you can see he gets such satisfaction because it goes right back in the exact place that it needs to go back. And if you think about it also, vocational tasks have a clear beginning and a clear end, and that really, really helps our students with autism. Cooking is certainly another way that we can create meaningful and predictable activities to our students who are in middle school and high school. Using visuals to sequence the activities supported with a voice output sequencing device is a very easy strategy. And by a voice output sequencing device, I'm just envisioning one that I use a lot, which was a step-by-step, and it's a single switch. You hit it, it'll say one message, you hit that one switch again, and it will say the next message. It's great for sequencing, especially like in a cooking activity where you have predictable steps. However, with our students with autism, we know that many are on special diets, and there are two things that I have come up with that really seems to be gluten-free, casein-free approved, and that is air pop popcorn. And I cannot tell you how many students love that, even at the middle school and high school level. Again, I think it goes into that repetitive, watching the popcorn pop over and over again. We did that a lot, and we sequenced that task. Fruit salad was another easy thing to make that passed all those diets. Also consider making pet treats. That might be something that you don't have to necessarily worry about that student's diet for, but it's still meaningful because they're actually doing it for a purpose. Down below, you'll see a lot of my favorite websites for visual recipes. And by visual recipes, I mean they already have all the visual supports in place for you. You just need to go in and print them. Brybeck Manor is my favorite for getting visual recipes. Speaking of speech, I think we're all pretty familiar with that. Symbolworld.org, 10snips.org, and then News2You. And I spoke briefly about News2You. It's basically an adapted literacy program. Again, many of our self-contained classrooms implement News2You, and basically they'll take a news story and modify it, and usually they do one story per week, but with each week there's always a recipe that goes along. So I was able to tie in sometimes with whatever unit they were doing and use the recipe in News2You, and their recipes already have all those visual pictures that you're going to need. All right, so let's talk about putting all the motivating pieces of therapy in a predictable order. I always went into my classrooms to serve my students. I rarely pulled them out for a lot of reasons. Number one, it is best practices in this population to serve them in their natural environment. Also, for me, I needed that support of the parapro and the teacher because most of my students have severe behaviors as well. But when I went into their classroom, always carried with me my own visual schedule, and that's on top, and it's to supplement their classroom schedule. So we're going to talk some about using visual schedules. These are just some examples of visual schedules that I pulled from some students on my caseload. On the left-hand side, you'll see a visual schedule, and this is a classroom schedule for this particular student. It goes from top to bottom. If you want to think about a student's cognition, the lower their cognition, the more you want to think about going top to bottom versus left to right. And this was a student who was on the lower end. You will also see that we used photographs. We did not use board maker symbols for the student because he was not at the point where he could understand board maker symbols. The one in the middle is almost like a first then, but it was a schedule that the student could transport with him. So if he were going to lunch, and lunch was, you know, so reinforcing, but playground is what he really liked, then this teacher a lot of times was able to take that little two-step schedule with her and help him transition to the lunchroom, because he knew after lunch playground was coming up, and she was able to visually remind him that, hey, playground's coming up, and that really helped de-escalate him. On the right-hand side, you'll see a schedule that I created for one of my particular students who I was able to tie in some IEP goals in her schedule. And one of her IEP goals was to greet people, to initiate a greeting. And so how she would do that is she had a numerical schedule. And so she would come in and she would get the first thing off of it, and it would say hi and then a blank. So she would say, hi, Miss Allison. And it got to the point where I didn't even have to point to the schedule. She just did it on her own. And then she knew that we had 3 activities to complete that day. And I love using numbers, because if you don't have time and you're in a pinch to come up and make those little visual pictures, you can just label your activities 1, 2, 3. It's much better than not having any visual in front of you. And the other great thing for this particular student was we did what's called forced choices. She had issues with control, and so we wanted to let her think that she had control over her environment when I was really the one that had control over the environment. So I might say, for one, do you want to do makeup or do you want to draw? And then she got to pick for number 1 what she wanted to do, even though I was really the one controlling the situation. This is a schedule within a schedule. That's what I would take in for speech therapy time. So if I walk in the room and say it's time for speech, well, that's great. Speech is on their classroom schedule, but what exactly does that mean? So I would outline the activities that I planned on doing during that speech therapy session. On the left-hand side is just a dry erase board, and for my kiddos who are readers, we would write it out, and we could just erase it as we completed each activity. On the right-hand side, that's just a long paint stick, and I would put each activity, and then we would move it to the back when we were complete. And you want to think about more ways to create predictability for that student, because we know that they are craving predictability, but it's also a way for us to help them with their behaviors. On the left-hand side, this is just another visual support for a schedule. Green is what we need to complete. Red means it's all done. I think we're all pretty familiar with the first then. And then in the bottom right-hand corner is a visual timer, and it just allows them to see how much time is left before that activity is finished. And the next one, these are called green-red choices. And I learned about this a couple of years ago. I think I learned from our BCBA about this, and it's really been effective. Green choices are the choices that are available to that student. Red choices are the choices that are not available to that student. So if the student says swing, you could say, sorry, swing's on red. And so it lets them know that you still honor that request for the swing, but it's just not available yet. And it also is a very proactive strategy, because you're preventing them from asking something that's not available. It's really going to help you with your behavior meltdowns. And then the last strategy that I like to use a lot is called a waiting stick. We know that waiting is very tough for many of our students with disabilities, especially autism. And the waiting stick really helps to make the concept of time more concrete, because time is very abstract and we've got to make it concrete. So if that student is waiting for his turn, for example, on the swing, I might say only 4 more stars and then it's your turn. Okay, so maybe we wait a couple of seconds. Then I can take another star off and say only 3 more stars, then it's your turn on the swing. And this is a great strategy that parents like as well, but it really helps in therapy sessions when you're having to take turns and one student is really wanting for it to be his turn. And this is where that Parapro can really come in handy. The Parapro could be doing this whole visual support to kind of aid that particular student that's having difficulty with the waiting. So all of those visual supports are important in our therapy sessions to really create predictability, and it really helps with behavior management as well. So they're all really proactive strategies. Okay, been there, rocked that. I love middle school and I love high school students, so I hope this gave you guys some good ideas that you will be able to take back and use with your middle school and high school students.
Allison, just again, thank you. That was a great webinar, and we learned a lot of great techniques from that.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
To get ASHA CEUs, you need to go back in and take the quiz, and it is linked with this, with the webinar in Cog Connects. So just go back and find this topic, and you'll see that there's a quiz there, and take the quiz, and then that information allows us to submit your participation to ASHA to get your CEUs. Okay, hope you all have a great evening. Thanks for stopping by and spending some time with us.